They never meant for you to hear this. In a town that barely exists on the map, a woman gave birth to her brother's child, and no one stopped her. The doctors stayed silent. The sheriff turned his back. And the church? It buried the truth beneath hymns and whispered prayers. But this isn't just one story. It's a window, a fracture, a glimpse into the darkest parts of America that were meant to stay forgotten, where family lines fold inward like broken branches, and secrets are stitched into blood. Gracie Whittaker wasn't a villain. She wasn't even a rebel. She was the product of a system older than memory, one where isolation was worshipped, outsiders were feared, and the blood was the only truth that mattered. Born in the mountains of West Virginia, her entire lineage was a closed loop. Twin brothers marrying sisters, cousins becoming lovers, daughters becoming wives. You weren't supposed to know her name. You weren't supposed to ask questions. But Gracie lived and died in a house surrounded by 15 children, most of whom could not speak, could not read, could barely function in the world outside those trees. Because this isn't about just biology. It's about design, control. Who benefits when a population is kept silent, isolated, unable to leave their own blood behind? You think it's just ignorance, but what if it's something older? Something ritual? When you look at Gracie's descendants, you're not just seeing the consequences of genetic collapse. You're seeing what happens when truth is bred out, deliberately. Because in every corner of this world where the powerful need silence, they build systems to erase the voice before it can ever speak. In cities, it's policy. In suburbs, it's prescription. But in places like Odd, West Virginia, it's blood. And that blood runs deep. You've only just opened the door. But if you keep watching, you'll realize something terrifying. This isn't a story about the past. It's a warning about the present. Because the ones in charge? They're counting on you looking away. They always blame the hills. They say the mountains made them this way, cut off, backward, forgotten. But that's a lie. A beautiful, convenient lie. Because isolation doesn't just happen. It's engineered. You see, Odd, West Virginia wasn't just geographically remote. It was socially amputated, removed from maps, from oversight, from interference. And that's not by accident. That's by design. Gracie Whittaker's family was left to spiral inward, generation after generation, not because no one knew, but because those who knew didn't care. Or worse, they understood exactly what they were watching. 15 children born from one womb, most unable to form a full sentence. Their eyes vacant, their bodies twisted not just by genes, but by a total collapse of choice. But ask yourself this. Why was there no intervention? Because the truth is uncomfortable. The truth reminds us that entire families can be turned into shadows if it serves the system. That silence can be inherited. That people, real people, can be born into cages built from lineage, guilt, and shame. Gracie's descendants weren't just off. They were never allowed to be whole. Never educated, never documented, never rescued. They became ghosts. Living echoes of a bloodline too tainted to be named, so they were left unnamed. One daughter, Laureen, never spoke a word in her life. No diagnosis. No therapy. No future. She died in the same room she was born in. No obituary. Just a hole in the dirt and a whisper on the wind. This is where history bends into horror. Because when a society ignores its most broken, it's not neglect, it's ritual sacrifice. It's what happens when the powerful need somewhere to bury their sins. Somewhere out of sight. Somewhere like Appalachia. They call it poverty. They call it bad luck. But those are just words. Disguises. The reality is something darker, a lineage allowed to rot so completely, no one even noticed the smell. But you noticed, didn't you? You didn't scroll away. You're not like them. And now that you've seen this first glimpse behind the curtain, I need you to do something. Not for me, not even for them, but for yourself. Type this in the comments twice. Blood remembers. Silence obeys. Write it once for the past, and once for the part of you that refuses to stay blind. Because we're not done yet. You're still falling. And what's waiting below makes everything you've heard so far feel merciful. You ever wonder how rot hides in plain sight? It doesn't wear a mask. It wears tradition. It wears last names, family trees, Sunday clothes, and family reunions. And while you laugh at its surface, it's bleeding underneath. John Emery Whitaker wasn't a monster. He was a mirror, raised to believe his cousin was his destiny, told that blood was thicker than consequence, that keeping it in the family wasn't shameful, it was sacred. This isn't a fairy tale of lost people in the woods. It's a system, an ecosystem, one that fed on ignorance, pride, and the sacred lie of genetic purity. Because purity is a myth with teeth. John and Gracie had 15 children, each one born not just into poverty, but into compounding mutation. Their genetic code was a spiral folding into itself, collapsing like a black hole where identity disappears and deformity becomes destiny. They called them touched, called them slow. But no one asked why. The kids grunted instead of speaking. Some walked with broken rhythm. Others never walked at all. A few rocked back and forth like human pendulums, caught between two generations of silence. And still, no one intervened. Not the church. Not the schools. Not the state. You think that's by accident? No. When a bloodline becomes too uncomfortable to acknowledge, the system doesn't fix it. It buries it. It labels it isolated, rare, unfortunate. But it never asks how many more there are. Because if it did, the myth of the American family would crack. This is deeper than incest. It's ritual stagnation. It's a refusal to evolve. And it wasn't just tolerated, it was protected. See, for families like the Whitakers, shame became inheritance. And every baby born with the same twisted features was a monument to a secret no one wanted to name. The horror isn't that it happened once. The horror is that it happened so many times, it became normal. Gracie and John died surrounded by those they made, but never truly knew. Their legacy? A lineage of silence, of stunted speech, vacant eyes, malformed limbs, and lost potential. Their home? A temple to the forbidden. A place where love meant blood, and blood meant submission. But now you know. Now the veil has torn. And if you're still watching, you're ready for what comes next. Because the spiral doesn't end in West Virginia. It spreads. And the next face it wears might look a lot more familiar than you think. There's a reason these stories were buried. Not just because they're uncomfortable, but because they fracture the illusion. You've been told that darkness looks like chaos, or crime, monsters in the night. But real darkness? It's orderly, ritualistic, hidden beneath dinner tables and photo albums. Let me tell you about Laureen. She was Gracie and John Emery's daughter, born into the fourth generation of this collapsing DNA spiral. And from the moment she opened her eyes, the damage was already done. Laureen never learned to speak. Not because she didn't want to, because her brain couldn't form the rhythm of language. Her eyes struggled to focus. Her limbs, uncoordinated. Her mind, trapped in a maze someone else designed. But here's what should break you. Laureen never left the family property. Never had a chance to see the world outside that house. No school. No records. No independence. She was a ghost with a heartbeat. And still, the system didn't care. Ask yourself, how does a child like this vanish from history? How does a life begin and end in silence, with no one asking why? Because to admit Laureen existed is to admit others do too. That this isn't folklore. It's fallout. We think of inbreeding as a mistake of ancient kings or rural outliers. But what if it's a blueprint, repeated in silence, protected by shame? The Whitakers weren't alone. They were part of a pattern, communities isolated by geography, sealed by poverty, and ruled by old men who thought bloodlines were crowns. This is more than genetic collapse. It's social collapse. And no one ever built a bridge out. Now here's where you come in. If you felt the chill running through this story, if you felt something waking up inside you, comment this phrase twice below. I see the spiral. I won't look away. Write it twice. That phrase isn't for the algorithm. It's for you. Because once you speak it, you can't go back to sleep. You've chosen awareness. You've chosen to open your eyes, even if what you see burns. Laureen died without a headline, without a eulogy. But she left behind a question that men like you have to answer. What happens when society stops watching? What grows in the cracks where silence blooms? In the next section, we go deeper. Past Appalachia. Past the forests and forgotten families. Into a new story, one that didn't die in the 1940s. It was born in the last decade. And this time, the rot wasn't hidden in the woods. It was hidden in plain sight. Rita was born in Texas in 2010. Not in some log cabin buried under Appalachian fog, but in a suburb just outside Houston. Electricity. Cell towers. Walmart down the road. But no one ever saw her. Not really. Because Rita was born into a hidden room, behind a locked door, to a teenage girl whose father was also her partner. Let that sink in. A child born from a mother who was still a child, who was also her father's daughter. This wasn't a generational collapse like the Whitakers. This was a nuclear detonation. When Rita was delivered prematurely, doctors noticed the warning signs immediately. Shallow breathing. Misshapen facial bones. Eyes that didn't track. A heart that beat like it had something to hide. At first, it was all whispered theories. Until a full DNA panel exposed the horror. More than 50% identical DNA, the kind only seen between parent and child. That's when the state moved in. Not out of moral clarity, but because they had no choice. The evidence was too loud. Both parents were arrested. The mother, barely past puberty, insisted it was love. But trauma doesn't wear a warning label. It lives behind the eyes. It feeds on obedience. It whispers, "This is normal. This is all there is." Rita was placed in state care, a ward of the system. Diagnosed with congenital heart defects, brain fluid buildup, and severe nonverbal autism. She underwent multiple surgeries by age 4. She will never walk unaided. She will never speak. And still, no one talks about her. You see, America loves broken people, as long as they break quietly. But Rita is a mirror. And when the mirror reflects generational silence, incest, and systemic failure, we look away. Because her existence asks a forbidden question. How does something like this happen, in a modern home, in a connected city, in 2010? The answer? It never stopped happening. You just stopped being allowed to see it. Governments cover it. Institutions miss it. Families hide it. And the victims, like Rita, pay the price with every breath, every surgery, every silent scream no one taught her how to release. This isn't about judgment. It's about recognition. Because when you recognize the pattern, it's already too late to ignore it. One more descent remains. And in that final fall, we'll pull back the last curtain, where bloodlines become prisons, and silence becomes a weapon. There's a reason stories like these vanish. Why they're buried beneath years of dust, court seals, and family silence. Because if you truly understood what they mean, you'd never see family the same way again. In America, we romanticize blood. We're told that family is sacred, unconditional, unbreakable. But what happens when blood becomes currency? When DNA is used not to create, but to control? What happens when the people meant to protect you are the ones who damage you the most? There's a house still standing in Odd, West Virginia. Crumbling, rotting, but alive with memory. 15 children once lived there. Not one escaped untouched. Some couldn't speak. Some never walked. Some never even learned their own names. And there are files in Texas, sealed behind closed courtrooms, documenting a baby girl named Rita, who carries not only her father's blood, but his sins. She doesn't speak either. She doesn't need to. Her body is the testimony. These stories are not accidents. They're patterns, cycles, echoes of what happens when truth is too dangerous, and silence is safer than exposure. But here's the part no one tells you. These stories still happen. Right now, there are children born into families with no outside eyes. Right now, there are girls being taught that love means obedience, that pain is normal, that silence is survival. Right now, there are forgotten houses with rooms that should never be locked, but are. And if you think this is just about rural towns or broken homes, you're missing the point. It's about systems. Institutions that knew and did nothing. Social workers who looked away. Doctors who didn't ask. Neighbors who heard screams and turned the music up louder. This is the cost of worshiping the image of family without demanding its integrity. This is the shadow America hides in its basements. You've now heard what most never will. And if it shook you, if it cracked something in you, comment twice below. Blood is not sanctuary. Blood is not sanctuary. Because once you've seen what lies beneath the surface, you don't go back. You evolve. There are more stories like these. More truths hidden in plain sight. And next time, we go even deeper. But for now, look at your walls. The silence between them. And ask yourself one last question. What secrets were never meant to leave your bloodline?